Led Zeppelin was like a big bang. Excess to excess.
I think the reason that Led Zeppelin are so unique as a band is because they brought so many musical influences to their songwriting and their playing and their performances.
Definitely the best band of the era that at least got into the public eye at interpreting other people's songs.
Put the four of them together in a studio and they created some of the greatest, if not the greatest, rock music of all time.
They had power, they had finesse, they had emotion.
I think that they were very ambitious, all as men, and they were determined to forge a new imprint, a new heavy metal sound, and I think that's exactly what they did.
Led Zeppelin is perhaps the best example of a band who were more than the sum of their parts. That was at the core of an almost mystical aura that surrounded them. They didn't release singles, they didn't appear on television. You had to go and buy their records, then you had to go and see them live. But it created an impact and a strength about the band that makes them unquestionably the best heavy metal band there ever was. And they were never seriously challenged while they were going.
None of us really knew anything about how good we were individually, and that didn't really seem to matter. What mattered was the fact that together we had moments when we earned the big grin.
People always, they try and sort of, they pigeonhole you, like all the heavy metal stuff and all that. If they only listen to the albums, they realise it was never riff after riff after riff.
I just think it relied a lot more on feel and soul. It's supposed to be jarring mechanically in a way with a voice flowing over the top of it, so as the music makes right angle turns here and there, and I keep on just searing over the top.
With America already under the spell of Led Zeppelin, all that remained was to put Zeppelin on the map in the UK. This was achieved by a single, groundbreaking appearance before 200,000 fans at a festival in Somerset near Bath. Zeppelin hit the stage just as the sun set, and soon won over the huge crowd with a blistering set which drew heavily on material for the band's second album. Zeppelin were now masters of all that they surveyed.
Having set that sort of heavy rock template, it was obviously eagerly expected, and they were expecting another heavy rock album, which is exactly what Jimmy Page delivered. I mean, I don't think you could accuse him of commercialism at the time, because I think this is the album he wanted to produce. But certainly it was another crushing album was expected, and it's certainly what they produced in Led Zeppelin 2.
Whole Lot of Love continues the swagger that they had finished their first album with.
Well, it's the riff that ate the world, isn't it?
Everybody knows it, and it's a calling card. It's like, hey, we're here.
Is Jimmy Page an amazing guitar player? Yes. Is Jimmy Page an amazing co-songwriter? Yes. Is Jimmy Page one of the best producers in rock and roll ever? Yes. The way that he produced Led Zeppelin is extraordinary, which is one of the reasons that they stand up today, not just because of their individual skills as players, but the way in which Jimmy was able to get that in the recording studio.
The way I like to work is when everything feels right in the studio and the mood of a number, whether it be a driving rock and roll one or an extremely sensitive number, it's that sort of raw emotion or that sensitive emotion that needs to be captured within the recording. And there's no point in trying like 40 takes to get it right. If it ain't working, you move on to something else and you'll find the next day the number will work fine.
What made Whole Lotta Love great, one, it's an extraordinarily simple song. There are 2 chords in the whole song. It's E and D, and that's the entire song. And the other element of that song that was perfect was Jimmy Page's solo in the middle. Page was the master of those little guitar bits.
Jimmy Page could write a riff that might be so simple, or even lent a little too much on some old blues, as it were, but it's the simplicity of which is the effectiveness.
I'm gonna give you my love. I want a whole lot of love. I want a whole lot of love. I want a whole lot of love. Yearning, baby, I've been learning all them good times, baby. I've been discerning.
One other element which is unbelievable, and I don't know if this is intentional or not. You hear Bonham and his hi-hat is going, and that's another thing that made Bonzo so great, is that while he was playing a lick, he would keep his hi-hat going in 16th notes during the song, or 8th notes, which is a very difficult thing for a drummer to do, to keep your left foot on a hi-hat, keeping a regular rhythm like that while you're doing something different with your right foot.
Without Bonzo, the band wouldn't have meant anything at all. Sure, I mean, he was the emulsifying agent, he was everything, he was the whole core of the thing. He was the guy who stopped it being just another rock band, really. At least in its performance, the writing. I mean, Jimmy's approach was so unique, and is so unique. But I mean, Bonzo's whole delivery was the thing that made it what it is.
The power of Whole Lotta Love, the sexual shenanigans that go into the middle, the coitus non interruptus, is something to behold, and also something to use as a soundtrack, if you so wish, to your misbehavior.
The sexually charged midsection, where Plant comes into his own, as it were.
Woman! 26,000 larynxes. Woman! Woman!
It's a bit risque, it's a bit dangerous, it's a bit threatening, there's sort of raw sexual energy.
The drums just hold you off, almost like a kind of woman teasing you, and the drums just hold you off, and then Jimmy Page just comes in there with this fiery solo. That's the blueprint for serious, no messing around rock and roll.
Best track on Led Zepp 2.
In fact, it's probably one of the greatest rock and roll songs ever written.
That really is about the most exciting Led Zeppelin song and the most exciting rock and roll moment I can think of in history. And I mean that.
And if I say to you tomorrow, take my hand, child, come with me to a castle, I will take you. But what's to be, they say. Catch the wind, see a spin, sail away, leave the day way up high in the sky.
What Is and What Should Never Be was a conscious effort by Led Zeppelin to try something a bit different on their second album.
What Is and What Should Never Be follows A Whole Lot of Love on Led Zeppelin 2, and it is contrasting. And you've got Robert Plant with lyrics that, you know, are beginning to mean something. It's very dreamy. The whole atmosphere on that track is really dreamy.
It opens very softly, very sort of ethereal-like, and the drumming is very controlled.
There's moments where it's easy to think that it's not actually rock music. It's so mellow and dreamy. It's just got this great sort of almost sort of Sunday afternoon kind of dreamy vibe about it.
What Is and What Should Never Be is a perfect example of Zeppelin managing to combine the light and the shade. And as such, John Bonham's drumming on the track is perhaps the most important thing there.
Bonham keeps it mellow, just sort of lightly tinkling on his ride cymbal, until then it starts to grow, and Page takes it up into sort of third gear.
And then when they would get to the main riff, John Bonham would attack the drum kit, you know, as only John Bonham could, and it would suddenly be a huge rock sound. What Is and What Should Never Be was to be a hallmark of Led Zeppelin song constructions. Heartbreaker is a riff again, and it's a blues riff, except he's very clever because it shifts, it goes up a tone musically, and it changes key, which was quite unusual for a rock band to actually change key quite so dramatic. So it goes from one key to another key and goes back again.
Some people cry, some people die by the wicked ways of love, but I'll just keep on rolling along, the grace of the Lord above. People talking all around about the way you left me flat. I don't care what the people say, I know where their job is at. One thing I do have on my mind, if you can clarify, please do. So when you call me another guy's name, when I'm trying to love.
The song is all about the musical interaction between Robert's voice and Jimmy's guitar.
Plant is at his very best here. It's sort of heartfelt. Again, a lot of raw sexual energy going on. That's the undertone.
This is again a fine example of Jimmy Page conjuring up this magical riff, seemingly out of nowhere, that's so simple.
I'd say the rhythm section dominates it more than Page and Plant, and you can't often say that about a Zeppelin track.
Wonderful bass drum technique. When he goes into that cut time fill or double time fill, he's just playing that open ride cymbal, just giving it all he has.
When you listen to it live, it just shows what a different band Led Zeppelin were playing live compared to in the studio. They were great in the studio. They were more than highly proficient. But no matter how hard they tried, they never captured the essence of what the band were like live.
Live, Heartbreaker was another song that could get extended from anything up to 10-15 minutes.
And you can just tell that they're having the time of their lives. It may not be the most complicated of Led Zeppelin songs, certainly doesn't feature the most complicated set of Led Zeppelin lyrics, but it's all about feel. Blues is essentially all about feel, and this song has got it.
Thank You is a major development forward in Led Zeppelin's acoustic side. There's Jimmy Page picking away delicately at an acoustic guitar, while John Paul Jones adds some sturdy Hammond organ. It's probably the most eloquent thing they've delivered up to this point.
Possibly for the first time you can hear Jimmy Page's love of people like John Renbourn and Bert Jansch in the folky sort of playing on his acoustic guitar.
It's bluesy, but you can start to hear that they've tasted a place where no one else has been. Even the bands that were working the same genre at the time, they were more kind of sedate, if that's the right word. This is kind of unbridled power that they've tasted, and you know, Page, you can see his development as a record producer.
I would still be loving you if mountains crumble to the sea. There would still be you and me.
Thank You is one of the softer tracks on Led Zeppelin 2, which itself was quite a strong rock-led album. And I think it's a very good example of the hippie idealism that Robert Plant brought to the band.
Thank You was a love song to Robert Plant's then wife when it was recorded for Led Zeppelin 2.
People forget he loved soul music as well as blues music and world music and all these other things. So he had a whole bunch of influences that crept into his vocal style.
This was a man that stood at the front of the stage at some of the, you know, playing some of the biggest concerts that rock bands had ever played at that point, and still to a certain extent are some of the biggest, without one iota of fear. His voice didn't shake for 1 minute. He knew he had it and he gave it. And that's one of the reasons I think that Zeppelin, you know, they conquered all before them so swiftly and no one else came near them.
Thanks to you, it will be done. For you to me are the only one, yeah. All right, happiness, no more is sad.
Zeppelin were already huge, and a constant round of touring only served to enhance their status. On record, Zeppelin were superb, but on stage they became something truly outstanding. In the words of that immortal phrase, they were tight but loose. No other rock band on the planet has ever come this close to this magical ability to merge structured songs around unstructured improvisations and seamlessly blend the two together.
By the time Led Zeppelin 2 had come out, the band were hugely successful in America, and I was fortunate to be invited to see the play in Carnegie Hall in New York. First time a rock band had ever played there, first time I'd ever been to America, and first time I'd seen Led Zeppelin playing to such an ecstatic audience. It's quite a thrill really, because when we arrived at the gig they'd sold all the tickets out, and as there were no seats I had to sit on the side of the stage, or stand at the side of the stage, which was no hardship. And the band rose to the occasion. They played one of the best shows I'd ever seen them do, even compared to, say, Earl's Court, which was later in their career. There was just something about the New York audience that inspired them to play. I mean, they were leaping out of their seats and shaking their hands and screaming, whereas back in London they'd been playing to, you know, like 50 guys standing there holding a pint of beer and eating a packet of crisps. Going, ooh, you know, impress us.
We played some tiny little place like on the first tour or something like that, and we were one room got so completely destroyed, and it was Bonzo's room, but completely destroyed, that we were waiting to go the next morning in the cars, and there's this long line of people, you know, of different trades, all waiting to get into the room. There's a carpenter and a plumber and a decorator, TV repairman, you know.
Are you a smash over here as well as over there? As much of?
Well, there's more people here. That's so. Therefore, it's it's a proportional difference, really. It's probably the same, but on a different scale here.
Did you expect this kind of appreciation of what you do?
Not to begin with, because
Not to this extent.
No.
We knew we were appreciated by the fact that people were coming along to see us in such great, vast numbers, all over the place, England and the continent and wherever. But no one expected this. I remember that we had to stop a gig in Pittsburgh, I think, once a long time ago. I mean, like, some of the kids actually had helmets on. That was, like, the cops were there and the kids are there, and they were all ready for a big fight, you know. I mean, I didn't think they even noticed us up on stage. You know, then they started into each other and went, okay, hold it, stop. Will the kids please go back and sit over there, and will the cops please go back and sit over there, and then we can maybe sort of like have an evening's entertainment, an evening's music, you know, instead of World War III.
Security-wise, with Led Zeppelin, we never had any barricades. There was no barricades there. You know, the PA was non-existent. Security was non-existent. It was in a trial and error. Every show was trial and error. But, you know, liability-wise, everybody had to wise up. Promoters, security companies, police, bands themselves, because they hired that venue that night, so it was down to them.
Life on the road with Led Zeppelin was its own world. Whether something like that will ever be repeated is a very large question. I would suggest the answer is in the negative, because Led Zeppelin was a one-off and not to be repeated.
You would have to wake the guys up 3 o'clock, if you could. If you couldn't, you would have to transfer them to a trolley and put them on the plane. And you done what they told you to do. As long as you got them at the show, you're fine. But completely different. You know, they had their own views and you know, they wanted to have a good time, and they did.
Robert, what happened in Perth with the police bursting in on you?
Oh, goodness knows. I think they were trying to get a bit of overtime in. I really don't know. I suppose it's the sign of the times, you know.
The worst place he ever played was in Iran. It was a government-sponsored festival, and so we got on. We started playing, got on, say, second number. And suddenly you could see a big arena, we could see this smoke sort of rising. So Robert said, you know, what are you doing out there? I mean, you know, we don't light any fires or anything. I mean, it's just stupid. What are you doing? Come here for music, etc., etc. And suddenly the smoke reached us, and it's not smoke, it's tear gas. And I suddenly look up, and right around the top of the arena, there's all, you see the glint of all those sort of riot shields and everything. And as soon as everybody realised it was tear gas, the kids pulled out of their pockets wet handkerchiefs. They were ready for this. And put them on, calmly sat back and wanted to hear some more music. That was when the cops charged.
The Zeppelin tours was very dangerous. There was always danger every day. You know, you'd wake up to it, you'd go to bed with it. It was always more sinister.
In what way?
They was gangsters. You know, it was rock and roll gangsters, and it was a different time. It was transition in America. The tour I was on there was when Peter Grant fired all the promoters, because the promoters was taking 90% and giving bands 10%. So Peter stopped that, and the guy was a genius, but it was heavy.
What's the difference between you and the Beatles as far as your music is concerned?
Well, I don't know. I suppose you'd equate the two by saying that they're both statements of what's going on in the music scene today. But we're completely unlike the Beatles, I would have thought, in our music.
Well, how do you feel about the Beatles?
I think they're great. They've done some fantastic statements.
Have you taken? Have they been in any way kind of the leaders for you, even, or have you emulated in any way?
No, not for myself, not consciously, no. I think they've obviously once heard what they've done, because it was pumped through the media all the time.
I think the fact that they got through to so many millions and millions of people has been an inspiration for every performing group in England, and I should imagine in the world. You know, the fact that they got over so much to so many people.
Do you ever hope to achieve the Order of the Garter? and have your predecessor?
What's that? The can-can? I don't know. Oh, the MBE. Oh, that.
Yes.
Oh, no, I think they've given up on the people like us for that, haven't they?
Zeppelin were helped by a continuing supply of great material on record. Retiring to a cottage in the Welsh Mountains, Zeppelin began working up new material. This was undoubtedly a quieter, more reflective album, but it was a classic nonetheless.
We went to Wales originally because we'd been touring for month after month after month with Zeppelin 1 and 2. And when I was a kid, I used to go to this cottage, which was quite remote. But it was, for us, it was a complete change from what we'd been doing, which was constantly playing all these festivals. So without electricity and without all the trappings and no telephone and no this, that, the other, the whole deal was to have a break and see if we could really stimulate ourselves.
You know, if you've listened to all the albums, you'll be able to listen to something and say, that sounds like Zeppelin, because it's a sound, you know.
Yeah.
But in actual fact, each album is very different. There's a lot of different things on each one.
Yeah.
And I thought 3 was especially different from 1 and 2, which were basically very heavy sort of music. And there's a lot of acoustic stuff on 3.
Yeah.
Well, Led Zeppelin 3 was the third album which came out in 1970. That was probably a little harder for the band to come up with something different that would placate the critics. I mean, there had been this kind of backlash where they were being called a heavy metal band, mainly because of the histrionics on stage and the screaming and the volume, but that obviously wasn't what Led Zeppelin was all about. That's just a part of the story. And on Zeppelin 3, I think they wanted to get across the other aspects of their music.
I don't know how I'm gonna tell you I can't play with you no more. I don't know how I'm gonna do.
From the very beginning of working together, the acoustic guitar had been there, whether it was on Babe, I'm Gonna Leave You or Your Time Is Gonna Come through. So it was no big deal. It was just kind of important to get away from a whole lot of love and say, hey, well, and we also do this.
When we got to about the third, I think, when we started using acoustic, they said, Led Zeppelin had gone acoustic, you know, they changed the style and everything. Everybody forgets there's like 2 acoustic numbers on the first album.
And I think it was a great success, the least successful Led Zeppelin album, and with the critics screaming for our lives and blood, saying, what's this crap? It was probably one of our finest moments.
Initially, the relationship between Led Zeppelin and the press was somewhat strained, or indeed maybe non-existent.
They had this policy that you were God one minute and shit the next, you know, and that's the way that they, you know, to keep the paper going, the controversy and stuff, you know. And in the end I thought, that's a trash, I'm not bothered to read this.
Do you feel that rock groups have not been given the proper feeling, the proper image by the...
Of course, they've never been allowed to get across. I suppose less so in England because the media is pretty biased as to rock music, and as far as television coverage and radio, it's virtually swept under the carpet. It's given very bad viewing times, not peak hours at all. So that speaks for itself, really, doesn't it?
We thought what we were doing was right and good, you know, and we felt it was quality music, and we had to. I mean, you've got to live by what you believe in, otherwise you might just as well forget it, as far as I'm concerned.
I mean, we just did whatever we wanted to do and said, look, for us, we had to just weave around wherever it was most appropriate. With amplifiers, without, it doesn't matter. In the desert, on the top of a Welsh mountain, wherever it was, which could be indicative and, you know, it could show what we were all about.
Immigrant Song is a classic that became an instant show opener for the band, almost as soon as they'd written it. By now, Led Zeppelin were oozing confidence from every pore, And you can tell in the way that Page, John Paul Jones and Bonham all batter the riff to insensibility in their own little individual ways.
Driving rhythm, syncopated rhythm, and Bonham just sits on it the whole way through. Sure, he plays some nice accents here and there, he breaks it up, as he does.
When I first heard Immigrant Song, which must have been around about 1970, I guess, probably the year it was released, it was one of those, you know, rip-roaring tracks.
When it comes thundering out the speakers, it must have scared the hell out of the clergy at the time. They wouldn't know what the hell was going on. Bang, straight in your face. It's demonic. It sounds almost, it's not evil, but it's menacing.
Immigrant Song was a great riff. It was this great sort of octave riff that Page came up with in F sharp. And then that part there was like this ninth, it's like a B9 chord that Page would sort of, he like would pull down on all the strings and create this little effect. It was a great song.
My performance I wasn't that pleased with first and second, but by the third I was being able to sing. I mean, Gallows Pole is one of my favourite tracks, and Immigrant Song is too, you know.
Robert Plant sort of got his Valkyrie song of the screaming Viking, the north wind coming, blowing over the winter hinterland, kind of howls over it. His images were really intriguing, and they were married perfectly to sort of Page's, that dark, winding, melodic kind of chord change he would always tend to write.
Part of my charisma is, is reliant on the other three, you know, and the same with everybody else, you know. We really get off on playing together, you know, and that's the whole secret of, I couldn't really go away and play with anybody else, because if I wanted to play, who else would I need for a drummer but Bonzo, you know? And the same with Jimmy and Jonesy. I don't think it wouldn't be right.
The lyrics are inspired not by Celtic mysticism, but by Norse mysticism. Come from the land of the ice and snow, you know, hammer of the gods, Valhalla, I am coming. This is all inspired by the Vikings. I mean, obviously Robert was on a bit of a Viking trip.
He got the idea for the lyrics when the band stopped off in Iceland en route to an American tour and played a show there.
I think a lot of people perceive him as a hippie because he was interested in this kind of folklore and what happened with the Celts and the Saxons and the Normans and all this stuff. So there's a lot of Celtic overtones, but I don't think that necessarily means that that's the only interpretation you could have in the song.
I think years later, Robert Plant said the lyrics really didn't mean that much. But then that's quite often the way with rock songs, isn't it? They've written what they want to write, and we as fans and listeners interpret what we want into it. And for me, that was definitely, and has remained, one of the best Zeppelin tracks ever.
Sales-wise, the third Zeppelin album kept up the momentum. The wider range of musical references also helped to bring extra light and shade to the crucial on-stage performances.
Since I've Been Loving You has got such drama. I mean, the way it kicks in slowly, the mood builds. It's, again, the whole four of them at their best.
The track Since I've Been Loving You allows Jimmy Page to stretch a little bit as a guitar player.
Absolute classic blues. And there's probably, in my opinion, there's probably no better player in a hard rock band that definitely got to the upper echelons of rock than Page.
Interestingly and cleverly, he chooses not to opt for not the loud, over sort of driven Marshall sound, but he goes for quite a small, tight guitar sound, which is sort of manages to wring out more emotion out of it. Very much in the keeping of his sort of the kind of blues influences that he'd been listening to.
Since I've Been Loving You is a traditional 12-bar blues that's been slowed down and then souped up and was recorded pretty much live in the studio, as you can tell by John Bonham's drums, which roll around the song like a drunken sailor, but always in time.
One of the other things you see in this song, which is quite interesting because it's quite an early track in their career, is John Paul Jones was a keyboard player as well. He also played mandolins and all sorts of stuff. He wasn't just a bass player. And he's playing some great Hammond organ in this.
John Paul Jones lays down huge slabs of organ sound. And then Jimmy Page delivers a magnificent blues guitar solo, which simultaneously manages to pay homage to the traditional blues of the past, while ushering in a completely new style.
John Paul Jones' contribution to Since I've Been Loving You, I think, is much the same as his contributions to the vast majority of the tracks they recorded. Whether it be in the early years or later on, he was hugely influential in the arrangements of most of the songs.
He was an amazing arranger. He had incredibly sharp ears, and he was into music that he brought music to the band that I think put a different colour into the mix of the band that would have been missing if you just took these other huge charismatic guys and you just took them as what the band were about. And John Paul Jones is easily forgotten, but he shouldn't be. His contribution to the band shouldn't be underestimated.
His work since with other bands, things like with R.E.M. His string arrangements are always amazing and always unexpected, which I think perhaps sums Zeppelin up. They always do unexpected things.
I don't know how I'm gonna tell you I can't play with you no more. I don't know how I'm gonna do what Mama told me, my friend, the boy next door.
If you don't recognise That's the Way by name, you'll certainly know it immediately when you hear when the music starts. It's a simple little acoustic song, very evocative, very similar to a lot of the sort of more pastoral pieces that appear on Led Zeppelin 3.
The acoustic tracks on there are just wonderful, and That's the Way is probably the outstanding acoustic number on there.
Can't believe what people say, yeah. You're gonna let your hair hang down. I'm satisfied to sit here working all day long. You're in the darkest side of town.
It suffered in sales. I think it was a bit of a disappointment. The fans didn't know quite what to expect. They had 2 heavy albums, and the band themselves, I think, were disappointed with the reaction to it.
And when I'm out, I see you walking. Why don't your eyes see me? And could it be you found another game to play? And 55 million wait and see. That's the way, oh, that's the way it ought to be.
As for the question of whether it's a filler, I don't think there's such a thing as a Led Zeppelin filler. To even suggest that it's a filler is insulting.
We thought what we were doing was right and good, you know, and we felt it was quality music, and we had to, I mean, you've got to live by what you believe in, otherwise you might just as well forget it.
If the third Led Zeppelin album seemed not exactly weaker, I wouldn't call it a weaker album, but it was had less impact than the first 2. But certainly the 4th album The untitled fourth album was a total blockbuster, and I suppose it's still regarded as the ultimate Led Zeppelin album, really, because it had so many great performances on it.
Led Zeppelin have been massively influential and continue to be so.
If you can't state that Led Zeppelin is one of your influences in a rock and roll band, you're not a real rock and roll band.
There probably isn't a guitarist who hasn't at one time toyed with a Jimmy Page guitar riff. And certainly there isn't a drummer who hasn't tried to reproduce a John Bonham drum riff.
How influential has Zeppelin been as a band? I mean, anyone who's in rock and roll cannot, whether you love them or hate them, you cannot take away the fact that they are probably one of the most influential rock bands of all time, and I think will remain so.
They're also, unfortunately for them, responsible for a million dodgy, second-rate rock and roll bands that tried to be them and just failed miserably.
Led Zeppelin were probably the single most important band of the 70s. It's fair to say that heavy metal would not have existed without them.